Hello everyone and welcome to Summer Tomato Live. Summer Tomato Live is your interactive online classroom where I cover all the important nutrition topics that you vote are the most important. I'm your host, Darya Pino, and I'm also the creator of summertomato.com, where you can go to find even more healthy eating tips and where any show notes that I discuss, during this show I'm going to talk about a lot of research, and you can find the links to any of that research when I publish this video in about a week over at Summer Tomato. So today we're going to be talking about salt, and I was actually shocked at how complex this topic was. I sort of expected it to be like any other topic where it's sort of good, here's the reasons it's bad, here's why the government agencies get their recommendations wrong and blah, blah, blah. And that's partially what I have. But there's a good amount of data about how salt interacts with different things that you eat and it's very much dependent on the context of your diet. And there's pretty good data about what diet is better. So I'm excited to tell you all about that. Let's see if there's any more business. Right, so if at any point during the show you have any questions for me, there's a little red Ask a Question button up in the corner, and feel free to use that. That's going to be better than asking questions in the chat room because it'll queue it up, and I don't always see everything in the chat room, but it'll queue it up and I'll get to answer it directly, and then also it'll go up on the screen so that people who are watching the recorded version of this video will be able to see it as well. So please use a little Ask a Question button. A note on that, though, is that you can only ask one question at a time. So if you put another question up, your old question will disappear. So be patient. I will get to your questions, and that is the best way to ask me something. But you guys are welcome to interact with each other and make fun of me or whatever else you want to do in the chat room. So feel free to use the chat room. But if you have a specific question you want me to answer, use the Ask a Question button. And of course, you're more than welcome to call in. I would love to have a one-on-one video chat with you, or a discussion about any topic. It tends to work better these days. The internet's working better. So feel free to call in if you have any questions. Use the same Ask a Question button. Just make sure you have some earbuds when you call in so that there's no feedback, because that's really, really difficult to hear. And if you're not watching live, if you're watching the recorded version of this and you want to participate in future episodes, you can sign up at tinyletter.com/summertomato, which is the URL at the bottom of the screen. And that is for the newsletter Tomato Slice. And it's more than just access to these videos. It's also, I basically am like your personal nutritionist. You can ping me with any questions you have. I send out just topics that are on my mind, and it's extra content than you can find at Summer Tomato, and I love all the subscribers so far. I just have great interactions with people, and it's a really fun group. So if you're interested in that, it's $3.99 a month, and that's at tinyletter.com/summertomato. So next week I scheduled an office hours for next Tuesday, I think at 3 o'clock, and so you can. We'll be having a show then. I haven't finalized the schedule for the rest of the month yet. At some point in July, I'll be talking about soy. But I'm also trying to set up at least one interview that should be cool, and maybe possibly another one. So I'll keep you posted on that through the newsletter as well. All right, so let's talk about salt today. So salt has sort of gotten a lot of press lately, more than I would have expected based on the health impact of salt and all the other things that are going on. I mean, salt is important, and it's especially important to people with hypertension. It's especially important to people with diabetes. It's especially important to people with kidney disease, and it's especially important to, I guess African Americans have a worse time with salt and controlling blood pressure as well. So, I understand that it's important for those people, but given that the huge obesity epidemic that we're facing and the metabolic syndrome and all these other things, it just seems like salt is so far down on the list of things that are problematic in the standard American diet that I was surprised that, for example, like the salt got a lot of press when the USDA dietary guidelines came out a few months ago, and people really zeroed in on that as if it was a really big deal, and I didn't understand that. But it does have a special place. For me, I think it's really important for a couple of reasons. I have my dad has really high blood pressure and hypertension, and he's actually had a stroke. So So this was an interesting topic for me to research. Also, my brother has kidney stones and kidney issues, which is very much related to salt and blood pressure. So, you know, just on a personal note, I'm sure you guys know people like that too, if it's not you yourself. So salt is, excessive salt and high blood pressure are very important. I don't want to downplay that. But I was, like I said, I was just sort of surprised that sugar wasn't getting more attention and processed food wasn't getting more attention. But so basically, let's just talk about what the USDA recommends. So they just came out with these new guidelines, and everybody was saying that they're fairly low on salt. So they suggest that people consume less than 2,300 milligrams per day, and that's for your average person. And then they specify that people over the age of 51 who are African American, who have hypertension, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, regardless of age, should limit it to 1,500 milligrams a day. And just so you know, that is really, really low. That's like a little less than half, or a little more than half of what most people are consuming. And what's crazy about salt is, like, there's no country that doesn't consume what, by scientific standards, people are saying is too much salt. Everyone consumes a lot of salt, which, you know, I don't think that's random. I think that's there's probably a reason for that. One, it tastes really good, and you know, I think, and as we'll see as we go through this discussion, I think salt has a different impact for different people, and so the same amount is going to be different for different groups. But one of the issues with controlling sodium intake, and one of the reasons why the dietary guidelines are reported to be so strict, is because the compliance is really low. So I think they were thinking, well, if we really lowball it, maybe people will reduce salt enough, something like that. But and they had other odd reasoning for making it so low, which is that, well, most of the people do fall into that category of either have hypertension. Like, a lot of people have hypertension. It's not a small percentage of the population. I think it's like, I don't remember. It's at least 30%. And, you know, that basically that the people that this is specific for makes up the majority of the population, and they felt that therefore the recommendation should just go out to everyone, even for people who it doesn't apply to, like me, because my blood pressure is consistently awesome. It's 100/60, and you know, I'm not old, and I'm not diabetic, and I'm not in any of these specific conditions. But for some reason, you know, they felt justified in imposing these recommendations on me as well. So I think, you know, there's a lot of controversy over this. A lot of people don't think salt is an issue at all, and we'll get into why that is. So just a really quick overview of why sodium is important. So basically, people who eat a lot of sodium are more likely to develop high blood pressure, also known as hypertension. And hypertension will cause stroke. And stroke is bad. Stroke is when blood vessels in your brain start to bleed, and it can kill parts of your brain and prevent you from doing certain functions. So frequently strokes are, you know, in the medial temporal lobe, and it'll prevent people from being able to speak properly. Or it can be really bad. It can be in a place that involves motor control, and it can make you paralyzed. It can be very, very, very disabling, and it's a big problem. And the bigger the stroke, obviously, the worse it is. You can also have mini strokes, which is not good either, obviously. And there's also some weak, if you ask me, data that it might be related, that salt might be related to cardiovascular disease. But again, as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of more important issues for cardiovascular disease, but there's a link. And I'm not surprised, because the same sort of bad diet is going to give you both hypertension and cardiovascular disease, and we'll get into that in a second. So I was expecting that when I started digging in the research, all I really knew about salt was I'd seen a few studies, and the main one that I'd put my faith in was something called the Cochrane Database Review. And basically what that group does is they do a very comprehensive meta-analysis of all the studies done, and they analyze them, and they decide, sort of make a consensus of what the data says about a certain topic. And they basically said, you know, a reduction of salt is very, very difficult to attain, because most people have a lot of trouble reducing salt intake and can only do it for a short period of time and then they go back. And then they also said it was only a mild reduction. And so I looked at that and thought, well, it's not very effective. Why are we focusing on this? We should be focusing on different things. But it turns out that when people do stick to the low sodium diet, it's actually pretty darn effective at lowering blood pressure, and especially for people who do have hypertension and are on medication. So it actually, if that's a problem for you, it does seem like, consciously restricting sodium intake is going to actually be very helpful, may save your life. So that's good. That's good. I mean, it's good news if you're really worried about hypertension. And I have, I'll post these all up on the website, but like a zillion studies that I read through to come to that conclusion. But the biggest issue with the Cochrane's study was that they accounted for compliance, and when you don't account for compliance and you're only looking at people who were able to stick to the diet, it's actually very effective. So that's it. The other issue is, like I mentioned earlier, salt is a very important aspect if you have kidney disease, and like I said, my brother has kidney stones, which, I mean, he's very young, and it's kind of weird. And for him, he really has to watch his salt in order to sort of keep that under control. And the kidney, basically what it does is it filters your blood. So your blood pressure, it controls all that stuff. So that is another place that salt is very important. But a couple other things I guess I should mention. There was, in the research, I did find a small link between salt and stomach cancer. But the more I read, the more it sounded like that was actually related to this bacterial infection, H. pylori, and that it's like in a country where we have pretty much clean food, that's not really a big issue. That's more of an issue in developing countries. And lastly, for those of you who are interested in the genetics, so I have my grandmother on my mom's side has high blood pressure, and my dad has high blood pressure. Genetics, it plays a role, but it's very complicated, and it's not a straightforward link between like one gene and one thing. So it's hard to judge, and it's a complex interaction. So in terms of impact on you, genetics is probably going to be a small factor, and you can do a lot more with like lifestyle adjustments. So that's that. I feel like there was something I was going to say. Anyway, so those are all the reasons that salt could be important. But, I'm mostly interested in how important salt is for me and, for you guys, and for, special populations are important, obviously. But, if you're a healthy person, how much do you have to worry about salt? Do you have to be like counting your salt grams or just like you would count calories or count sugar? Or if you're healthy, can you just sort of wing it and hope for the best, and then if you ever do develop a condition, then start worrying about it? So that's sort of what I was trying to get at when I was doing my research, and they don't often talk about, well, the main data I found about healthy people and consuming salt is that lowering your salt dramatically has a fairly small decrease in blood pressure, and if your blood pressure is already fine, you don't necessarily need that. So I couldn't find any reason to worry about it if you're already fairly healthy and your blood pressure is good. But I did find some interesting things that are worth talking about. And one of the biggest issues here, and probably one of the reasons why salt is starting to get the attention that it's getting, is when you start breaking down. So I spent all this time trying to figure out how salt impacts us. But then I was like, well, let's step back a little bit and ask, where does salt come from? Like, where's the salt coming from in our diets? And not surprisingly, I'm not surprised that this is true, but I'm surprised by the magnitude, how true this is. The majority of salts comes from processed food products. And when I say majority, I mean 75%. Like, that's a lot. Like, that's a lot of salt. Like, I don't eat processed food, so that's like 75% less salt. And specifically grain products, so cereal, bread, stuff like that. And to processed grains and processed meats. And when I say processed meats, I don't just mean ground up. I mean cured, like ham and smoked turkey and bacon and stuff like that. Nothing against bacon. And this is true in like every country that's not Asian. In Asian countries, the main salt intake is from cooking soy sauce, fish sauce, stuff like that. But in the US, Australia, Canada, Europe, it's mainly from junk food. And what's really interesting is, so if you're eating a lot of processed food, that alone, just cutting it out, will reduce your salt intake dramatically, first of all. But second of all, that salt in the junk food is a different kind of impact than salt that you just put on your food at the table. And here's why. So there was good evidence that one of the most effective the reason that we all think, or that the studies show that reducing salt intake is beneficial, is that they developed something called the DASH diet, the diet to stop hypertension. And it is very effective at reducing blood pressure. But it's more than just salt reduction. It's also high in fruits and vegetables and all these other beneficial things. Toaster, you can't do that. And it turns out that matters. So one thing, the first thing that I found that really made me sort of raise my eyebrows at what was going on here was some data on fructose. So I was searching salt and hypertension, and then I found like fructose kept coming up, and I was like, well, is that really what's causing hypertension? And kind of is the answer. It's not alone. It uses salt too, but basically what fructose does is it increases how much salt your body absorbs. So if you're already, let's say you're eating like 2,000 milligrams a day of sodium, but if you have a lot of fructose around as well, you're going to be absorbing a lot more of that. So that's crazy, right? Because when you think about processed food, what's it made out of? Almost all processed food is made of salt, high fructose corn syrup, and various kinds of trans fat, right? So that's going to make it a lot worse. But keep in mind that we're not just talking about high fructose corn syrup here. So fructose is a molecule, and it's also 50% of what you consider sucrose or table sugar. So sucrose is made up of two molecules, one fructose and one glucose, and that's what sucrose is. And high fructose corn syrup just has a little bit more fructose. Agave has a lot more fructose. But either way, like, you can't just avoid high fructose corn syrup and think you're free of this. Even cane sugar, even table sugar, anything like that is gonna be contributing fructose to your diet and making you absorb more salt. Which probably, I'm not gonna speculate on something, but anyway, let's just say that salt from processed foods is worse for two reasons. One is that there's a lot more of it, and two is that your body absorbs more of it. So the other thing that's important is that there are other important nutrients, and salts specifically, that actually have the opposite effect of sodium. So potassium and calcium in your body react sort of like have the exact opposite function across membranes and all that stuff. So this is important as well because the foods that are high in potassium and calcium are vegetables, specifically your green leafy vegetables. And these are going to counteract the effects of sodium. So you get the exact opposite effect when you're putting salt on fresh food, right? You're getting not as big of an impact. So that means having a switch between fresh food and processed foods makes a huge difference in how your body's going to react to the salt. Because not only if you're eating a lot of junk food and not eating healthy food, not only are you getting way more sodium, your body is absorbing it more, but you don't have the healthy potassium and calcium in there counteracting that bad stuff that's going on to help you. So it's a like triple whammy if you're eating processed food, and it's really, really bad for you. So I was shocked that the data was so clear on this. So it's great news if you eat healthy. Salt is going to be a lot less of an issue for you because you have that beneficial potassium. you don't have all that fructose and you're doing much better. So the one other thing I wanted to discuss as well is a problem with when people who do eat junk food, a problem with telling them to sort of across the board just cut salt, is that salt right now is the best source of iodine most of us have. And if you're deficient in iodine, you're more likely to develop goiter and hypothyroidism. So that could be a problem, and it's even a problem if you just only use sea salt. If you're not using iodized salt. So make sure if you're worried about hypertension or you want to reduce your salt or processed foods, just make sure that you're aware of your iodine status and that you're getting sufficient iodine, because that is you really don't want to have hypothyroid. That's really bad, and it'll make you gain weight. So, right. So that's what I found. So I would say that if hypertension is a problem for you, your first line of defense, your first line of defense should be to reduce processed foods, and especially the high sodium and high fructose processed foods, and increase your vegetable intake. A few other, if you're watching this because you're interested in hypertension specifically, losing weight is actually really helpful as well, and so is exercise. So I feel like that's why I probably have good blood pressure. I run a lot and eat good vegetables, and I get a lot of exercise. So, and obviously those things are great for other reasons as well. You'll lose weight, you'll feel better, you're less likely to get heart disease, diabetes, cancer, the whole thing. So I think that's my whole story. Yeah, that's my whole story. Awesome. So that's salt. Hi Mark. Yeah, this is Toaster. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to find that the data was so clearly negative against processed food, and I'm happy to take any questions you guys have, or if you have questions for Toaster, he'll answer them as well. Multitask. So cute. So you guys surprised by this? I was a little surprised. I didn't know about the fructose thing. Oh, here they are. Here they come. Excellent. Somebody should call in, because calling in is awesome. Okay, this is an interesting question. How do you know your iodine level? I have low blood pressure, but hypothyroid. So that's a great question. I would go to the doctor. If you're already hypothyroid, I imagine they're testing for this stuff, but I would definitely go get that tested. I don't think you can just I don't think there's an at-home test for it, for example. But yeah, definitely consider that. It's easy to forget. Because I think everybody assumes that we're getting enough iodine, but from the data I looked through, a lot of people are still deficient. So it's definitely worth looking into. Okay. This is an interesting one. So can you describe the health advantages of sea salt? So I don't know that there are any real health advantages of sea salt, except, in my opinion, it tastes a lot better. And when you sprinkle it on food, you want to eat that food more. I think it's really just a foodie thing, like a culinary thing, because different salts will have different mineral complexity, and maybe there's benefit to that. But again, it's not iodized, so you don't have that really important elements. The thing you have to be careful with using sea salt as opposed to regular salt, you have to realize that the sea salt's going to be usually much chunkier, and so if you're measuring, you have to adjust for that. And there are tables and stuff for that online that you can look up, and it'll give you the how to adjust for stuff like that if you're substituting it in a recipe. But I've never heard of any direct benefit of sea salt. It doesn't make you smarter or something like that. So yeah, great question. So James, this is an interesting question. So I'm going to flip over to the chat. Can you clarify this for me? Molly, could you ask your question in the question thing? That's a good question, but nobody else can see it. So James, does the same apply to calcium chloride in food? What is that? What does the same what apply? Someone? Anyone? All right, we'll get back to that. But I don't really understand. Calcium chloride is just calcium. Like all ions, like sodium, calcium, potassium, they're positive, and they usually have chloride around in order to balance that charge, because you can't just have free floating charges. So they're always together. Is that what your question is? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to drop that one because I'm not quite sure what you meant. So, okay. So what if you need more than average salt? How do you get that salt in a healthy way? I would say, I don't know why you would need that. Maybe you're maybe you're a runner and you sweat a lot. I would say just add it yourself to food that's fresh, good food. So, going to get like some cup of noodles with like 3,000 milligrams of sodium is not the best way to get healthy salt. I would just add it yourself to food. It tastes amazing. Like I use a good amount of salt on my food because I eat really healthy, and it just accentuates the flavor. It makes it delicious, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. This is interesting. So we've read that reducing salt intake can help with osteoporosis. Have you heard this? I think I've heard this, and I don't think it's panned out. I can double check for you and post it in the show notes, and I'll remember. But I've heard protein is a problem with osteoporosis, but that ended up not being true. Maybe if your salt and it like somehow counteracted your calcium, but my guess is that study was like people who ate really bad food, and when you correlate how much salt they eat, they also are more likely to get osteoporosis because they're vitamin D deficient and because they're not eating a healthy diet. Vegetables help prevent osteoporosis. So, I mean, but that's going to be, my guess is that was an epidemiological study, and it was a correlation and not causation. But I can look into that for you, and I will post that in the show notes. And this is an interesting question. So, what are your thoughts on Bragg liquid amino acids in terms of taste and health benefits versus soy sauce? So this cracks me up because I haven't had Bragg since college when I was living with some vegetarian, vegan friends. And they swore that, you needed to get all your protein if you're vegetarian, which you don't, you're fine. And so they were doing this so that they had all their protein. And so it's a gimmick. I don't see any real benefit of it. You can get protein from anywhere. The taste, I don't remember exactly what it tasted like. I remember it tasting okay. It tastes a little different from soy sauce. I wouldn't necessarily dip my sushi in it or anything like that. But, I don't really have much of an opinion on it. If you like it, it's probably fine. I haven't looked at the ingredients, so that's what I would do. I would go take a look at the ingredients. Maybe I'll post that on the show notes too. And, if there's MSG in there, I wouldn't touch it. If there's anything weird in there, I wouldn't touch it. But if it's just, I don't know. If it just seems like natural stuff, it's fine. Soy sauce, to me, sounds more like a natural source of food. So I'm going to drop this, and I think that James clarified his question in the chat. Yeah. So he says the same warnings for salt, sodium chloride. Does that apply for salts such as calcium and potassium? No. So those are totally opposite. So potassium chloride reduces blood pressure. It's what's in vegetables. It's good for you. One treatment for high blood pressure actually is you can buy potassium salt and use it as a seasoning, and that helps people. So they're completely different. Your body uses them completely different. So thank you for clarifying that. That's a really important point. How do you avoid water retention from salt, or does that have to do with sugar? So that's actually, it's funny you should ask, because when I said that I wasn't going to speculate on something, this is what I was thinking. I was thinking that when you eat processed junk food and you like blow up, and I've had that happen, like when I've eaten really bad, your fingers get all swollen and you just feel bloated and it's gross. It might be because of the fructose. I don't know. Since I've switched the way I eat, I have never had that happen, I don't think. I've never had water retention from salt that I've had from like adding salt to my own food. It only ever comes from processed food. So the way you avoid it is avoid processed food and drink water. And I mean, you could, diuretics or pills you could take for that, but I don't think that shouldn't be necessary. Also, it's temporary. Going to the gym should get rid of some of that. So, but drink more water. Just continue drinking water, and that's just your body trying to balance itself out. It's not something you have to fight. You can prevent it by eating better. Good question. Okay, so this is a good one. Can I comment on the relationship between salt and diabetes? Yeah, so diabetes is one of the populations of people where hypertension is a problem. And it has to, from what I read, which is fairly superficial, so I'm not like a total expert on this. This wasn't what I was digging into, but I got the impression from the data I was reading that it has to do with the kidneys. So diabetes can tend to create kidney disease, kidney failure, that sort of thing. And that is a strong relationship with salt. And salt can be very problematic. So if that's the sort of situation you're dealing with where you're diabetic and you're having kidney issues, you might need to seriously cut back on salt to the point where your food isn't probably going to taste as good, but it's necessary for you to be healthy and to get better is to sort of cut back. If somebody knows more, let me know, but there's definitely a bigger issue if you've got diabetes. Awesome. So that was the last question in my question queue. Anybody else have anything? James, did I clarify your question on potassium and calcium? I hope so. Wow, that was really fast. It was the fastest episode ever. Anything else? Awesome. So I personally, the way I use salt is I keep some sea salt in my house. That's usually what I use to season stuff. But if I'm ever, like when I boil water, for example, when I boil lentils or beans or something like that, and I add salt to a dish, or if I'm making soup, I always use iodine salt for that. So sea salt for me is what I use when it's sort of like a garnish. Like I sprinkle it on top of a stir fry, and I'm actually going to be tasting that salt a little bit when it's literally just a seasoning to balance the flavors. And soup is a great example of that because that soup is all about balance. And I do like to make soup, and I always use iodine salt for that and for this reason. And you can assume that most restaurants, and I think you can, I'm pretty sure you can assume that most restaurants and establishments like that are going to be using the iodized salt in their cooking. Most of them aren't really going to be using sea salt. I mean, fancy ones will, but I once was at a dinner, I think it was actually at the French Laundry, and there was this, they came out with this platter of bread and butter and salt. And the salt, they had like this pink Himalayan salt and this like gray other beautiful salt. And then they had this like 40-million-year-old dinosaur salt from like Montana or something, where like when the ocean used to be in Montana. It was crazy. It was pretty amazing. I don't know that I could honestly tell the difference, but it was cool to try dinosaur salt. All right, do you guys have any more questions? I think everybody got their questions answered because we're losing them. We're losing them. Oh, here we are. Is there a minimum salt guideline? I mean, salt is necessary. What I read was that I think the minimum, if you're not sweating, was like 180 milligrams, which is very low. I feel like the scientists are missing something. Like I mean, it's weird to me that people across the entire planet consistently consume on the order of like 23 to 2,500 milligrams of sodium, and all we need is 180. I think that's a little suspicious. I feel like we're maybe missing something there, but I don't have data for that. So as far as the research I saw, the only thing that they said was 200 milligrams, pretty low. I wouldn't worry about that. But, you have all these other issues with, iodine and stuff like that. So, yeah. This is a good question. So should healthy, older/aging adults be careful about salt intake to prevent hypertension? Yeah, that is definitely one of the recommendations of the USDA, and it's good advice. The older you get, the harder it is to monitor your blood pressure. I think probably one of the reasons for that is your body starts getting tired, and your kidneys and your other organs, they don't quite work at the efficiency they used to. I would suggest just keeping a really close eye on it. I mean, I don't know how often you guys go to the doctor, but when I was a student, I went all the time because it was free. And the first thing they do, they don't even talk to you, but they weigh you, they check your blood pressure. And so, I've had my blood pressure checked like several times a year for the last 10 years. And, that's a sort of like proactive behavior you need to have. And if you don't want to go to the doctor all the time, you can get one of those digital ones. You can do it at home. They're not perfect, but if you do it 3 or 4 times and average it, you'll get a decent idea of where you stand. You can also take your pulse. Your pulse shouldn't be very high, and just watch it for sure. And if you are worried if it's getting a little high, definitely salt's a great way to cut back and probably get it under control. But so's exercise, so's potassium and eating more vegetables. So there's a lot of things you can do. This question. I've seen you use bouillon with beans. Mine seems very processed. Is it that it's so little? Okay, so I've actually recently, I want to tweet this out because I have a lot of foodies follow me and they probably have the answer to this. Bouillons are really hard. So a lot of them are nasty. Like they're filled with MSG. They're really just like nasty stuff. I know there's some natural ones. Because for me personally, like I don't want to like I have my own homemade chicken stock, and that's fine. But like it's in the freezer, it's frozen. Like if I'm like just gonna make some beans, I generally don't want to take that out. And actually, honestly, for beans, I prefer beef stock. And I don't have beef stock because I don't buy cows very often. And so, for me, I like to have the cube. It's just like you don't have to remember to thaw it. You don't have to make it. You just like pull it out. So I'm on a mission to find some natural, organic or something, or at least natural beef bouillon. Right now, all I've been able to find is a natural chicken version that I found at my local grocery store Buy Right. And I don't know, it looks a lot better. The ingredients are like in English and there's no MSG, nothing crazy in there. So I've been using that, but I really miss my beef bouillon. So I want to try to find that. But yeah, it is, you're right though, like it's not the biggest of my fears because I'm using it to make homemade food and it is a very small amount. But that being said, I'd rather not have all that weird stuff. So I will let you guys know if I can find it because I would really like to find some good bouillon cubes. Great question. Awesome question. The sugar in there, I don't worry about it. It's a very small amount of sugar. Oh, yeah, we have more. How do you go about monitoring intake, or is it a case of cutting processed food and hoping for the best? Yeah, that's a good point. I've never actually measured my sodium intake, and I don't feel like it's necessary given that I have good blood pressure. If so if you cut out processed food, like I said at the beginning of the show, you'll be presumably cutting out 75% of your sodium, which is a lot. And at that point, I suppose it would be very straightforward if you make your own food to measure how much you add. And, you know, although it's a little harder to do that, I mean, you have to like literally eat every meal at home. Or you can make some sort of guess for like your average restaurant meal and sort of factor that in. So, and you know, most processed food has labels. They're required to label that stuff. So you should be able to figure it out. That sounds like a lot of work to me, but I'm sure it's possible. The fructose thing freaked me out. My dad just loves that sugary drink. Ugh, it's fruit juice. He loves it. He has these blood pressure issues. It kills me. Any other questions? So I got a good amount of time. At this point, actually, if you guys want to ask me about anything, I'll take questions. I'm holding office hours, and that'll be an open office hours because it'll be during the day. Next Tuesday, I believe that's the 9th, July 9th, at 3 p.m. So I already scheduled it on Vocal. You can follow me there and always get up-to-date info on when I'll be doing shows and whatnot. And if you want to sign up for future episodes, of course, you can always go to tinyletter.com/summertomato, which will also get you access to my awesome newsletter, Tomato Slice, which you guys like it, right? It's nice to have someone, I think, that you can just ping with like any random health question, like all these little health questions. Like if you watch this and you come up with a question later and you're a subscriber, you can just sort of ping me later and I'll get to it and answer it for you. So I'm glad I record the shows because that way I can always remember to go back and answer all the questions. All right, so if you guys are done, oh no, we're not done. This one kills me. How do you deal with trying to help a parent be healthier in terms of effective tactics? So I will include this on the show notes. I have a post that I wrote called How to Help Friends and Family Eat Healthier, and it's really hard. It's really hard because the last thing you want to do is be preachy because that just it closes people off. It's not what, like, most people know they don't eat right, and for you to like call them out on it puts them on a defensive, and that's like really bad. Then they'll never listen to anything you say, even if it's very reasonable. So I've made some good headway with my dad. He's a subscriber too. He might be watching, but he's slowly changing how he eats because of me. But then again, I have like a whole blog and I write about this stuff all the time and I care passionately about it. And he reads it because he's my dad, not because he cares, about. But like, slowly it's sinking in. Like he's like, oh, I bought kale. What should I do with it? You always write about kale, and that's hard. But I think being compassionate and being gentle and sort of, if you explain it in a way, and this works for me, where you explain it as something that's been great for you. If you're like, wow, I discovered this vegetable and it's really good, and oh, by the way, I heard that, eating vegetables is really good for hypertension. You should check this stuff out because I know you've got high blood pressure, if something like that. Or another thing that helps is like, it's not really you being preachy. Sometimes I send articles, like if something's really bad, like, that sugar thing that came out in the New York Times not too long ago. Sometimes I'll like send stuff like that to my dad just so he's aware. It's like, the state of the science, and that's not too preachy. It's like, oh, I just thought this was interesting. Not like, you got to start doing this. You can never do that. But if you just express it as something that you thought they might find interesting, that's sort of the best way to go. And also, whenever you get the chance, whenever you get up the opportunity, cook for them. Take them to the farmer's market. Take them, show them that healthy food can taste really amazing, and it's not like you're missing out on anything. In fact, the opposite, like they're missing out because they shop at the grocery store and that food is all like not nearly as tasty. So that's you got to win people over with. You got to be persuasive, and you've got to make it seem like the grass is greener on your side. So that's always my tactic. Great question. I love that question. I wish I could just like cook every meal for my dad, but he lives 600 miles away. All right. So thank you, Aisha. Anybody else have any questions? Comments? Well, this was a great one. Thank you guys for being an amazing audience as always. And so I'll publish this show on iTunes and YouTube. Well, you guys, subscribers will get it on YouTube in the next couple days. The rest, it'll be published on Summer Tomato for the public in about a week, and on iTunes as well. And by the way, if you're ever looking for an archive of all the shows, you can go to the iTunes channel. They're all there. Or you can go to my YouTube channel. They're all there. Or if you go to Summer Tomato and you go to the Live tab, I have a link there that goes to there's like a tag that's for the shows that you can see them all there. I'll send it out in the email. So I guess we'll just wrap it up. So thank you guys so much for joining, and I hope you learned a lot about salt, and I will see you all next week. Have a good one.